This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we remember the Colombian novelist Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He died Thursday at the age of 87 at his home in Mexico. He is widely regarded as one of the century's greatest writers. Our guest here in the studio is Isabel Allende, the best-selling Chilean writer, one of Latin America's most renowned novelists, as she joins us for this exclusive interview in our studios here in New York. Juan?
Well, I wanted to remark, as Isabel has said, that that Garcia Marquez is still with us in his writings. And all of us who have read his books over the years have our own favorite passages, of haunting passages that stay with us for years. I wanted to read one from The General in His Labyrinth.
That's about Simón Bolívar.
Right, the story of the great liberator, Simón Bolívar, in his last days. And the amazing thing is here you have Bolívar, a figure who's known throughout Latin America, revered throughout Latin America, spent his life in wars of liberation. And in his final days, Marquez has a passage where he talks about Bolívar's disposition to literature, and where he had his secretaries reading books to him. And here Bolívar is dying, and Marquez writes, "It was the last book he read in its entirety. He had been a reader of imperturbable veracity during the respites after battles and the rests after love, but a reader without order or method. He read at any hour, in whatever light was available, sometimes strolling under the trees, sometimes on horseback under the equatorial sun, sometimes in dim coaches rattling over cobbled pavements, sometimes swaying in the hammock as he dictated a letter. A bookseller in Lima had been surprised at the abundance and variety of works he selected from a general catalog that listed everything from Greek philosophers to a treatise on chiromancy. In his youth, he read the Romantics under the influence of his tutor, Simón Rodriguez, and he continued to devour them as if he were reading himself and his own idealistic, intense temperament. They were impassioned readings that marked him for the rest of his life. In the end, he read everything that came his way, and he did not have a favorite author, but rather many who had been favorites at different times. The bookcases in the various homes he lived in were always crammed full, and the bedrooms and the hallways were turned into narrow passes between steep cliffs of books and mountains of errant documents that proliferated as he passed and pursued him without mercy in their quest for archival peace. He never was able to read all the books he owned. When he moved to another city, he left them in the care of his most trustworthy friends, although he never heard anything about them again. And his life of fighting obliged him to leave a trail behind of books and papers stretching over 400 leagues from Bolivia to Venezuela. Even before his eyes began to fail, he had his secretaries read to him, and then he read no other way because of the annoyance that eyeglasses caused him. But his interest in what he read was decreasing at the same time, and as always, he attributed this to a cause beyond his control. The fact is, there are fewer and fewer good books, he would say.
And that is from?
And this is from The General in His Labyrinth. And to me, the image of a warrior spending all his life fighting, but always carrying this huge retinue of books and somehow trying to read everything he could is classic Garcia Marquez.
I wanted to go back to Gabriel Marquez in his own words, as Juan read them as well from his book. This is him talking about himself as a journalist, and this reminded me of you, Isabel. He started out as a reporter in the early 50s and returned to it periodically throughout his career as a novelist. This is part of a 1971 interview he did with the legendary writer Pablo Neruda.
I would like to return to journalism, above all to be a reporter, because I have the impression that advancing in literature, you lose your sense of reality. On the other hand, the work of a reporter has the advantage of every day being in contact with the immediate reality.
Now that was Garcia Marquez speaking in 1971. In this clip from the 1998 documentary, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, A Witch Writing Literature, he talks about why he became a journalist.
I'd say I turned to journalism because for me, what was more interesting than literature was to tell about real things. From the point of view, journalism has to be considered as a literary genre, especially reportage. I've always defended this idea because even the journalists refuse to acknowledge that reportage is a literary genre. In fact, they underrate it. For me, a reportage is a short story, completely rooted in reality. Though a short story is also inspired by reality, so is fiction. No fiction has ever been completely invented. It's always based on the experience. I've realized the way I came to journalism was part of this process. It was just another stage, not in my getting a literary culture, but in the developing of my true vocation, telling stories.
Your thoughts, Isabel Allende and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, talking about journalism and fiction. You too started as a journalist. And
many Latin American writers have started as journalists, and even as they became novelists, they continued working as journalists. I think that journalism gives you all the ideas. You are in touch with reality. You are in touch with people, listening to people's stories. In my case, I started as a journalist, but I was a lousy journalist, and I never could stick to the truth. Or I could never be objective.
Neither can most journalists.
Yeah, I could never be objective, and I'm sure he wasn't either, Garcia Marquez. He's making that up.
But you know that clip that we first played where he is with Pablo Neruda? Mm-hmm. And for young people who are watching, listening, or will read this in the next days, for those who don't know who Pablo Neruda is, his significance, but also that meeting you had with Pablo Neruda a few days before he died, talking about journalism.
Well, Pablo Neruda was our second Nobel Prize for Literature, for poetry. The first one was Gabriel Mistral. And he was known all over the world. His poetry was translated all over the world. He won the Nobel Prize. And when he got sick, he went back to Chile, to Isla Negra, because he wanted to die and be buried in his house in Isla Negra. Where his tomb is now, there is a rock, and under that rock, he and his wife are buried. Shortly before the military coup of 1973, I visited him in Isla Negra, and it was a good day for him. He was up and around with a poncho. We had lunch and a wonderful corvina, a Chilean fish, and white wine. And then I said, can I do the interview now, Don Pablo, because it's getting late and I have to go back to Santiago. And he said, what interview? Well, I came to interview you. He said, no way, I would never be interviewed by you. You are the worst journalist in this country. You lie all the time. You can never say the truth. You put yourself in the middle of everything. You cannot never be objective. And I'm sure that if you do not have a story, you make it up. Why don't you switch to literature, where all these defects are virtues?
That's Pablo Neruda speaking to you. And in this last minute we have, your final thoughts on Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
As I said before, my heart is mourning, but not my mind. In a way, I feel great sadness because he's gone. But he has been gone for many years now. He has not been writing for many years. But the books are immortal, and they will always be with us. And I will be able to read them over and over, forever. So he's always with us.
I want to thank you very much for taking this time, Isabel, for these brief days you've been in New York, to spend this morning with us. Isabel Allende, the great Chilean writer, one of Latin America's most renowned novelists, now lives in the Bay Area in California. She's the author of some 20 books, including Maya's Notebook, House of the Spirits, Paula, Daughter of Fortune. Her latest book is called Ripper. She was born in Peru. her family was in Chile, where she went back to. We will do the full interview with Isabel Allende about her work next week. But for now, this does it for Democracy Now! If you'd like a copy of today's show, you can go to our website at democracynow.org.